All right, we're doing 3-2. So you need to do this warm up on your own. If you have your Snowman Lab filled out, you can use that, or you can actually calculate it. So like you'd have to take 210, you'd have to find the reference angle. So 210 minus 180 is 30. So then you're going to have to take the sine of 30 and divide by the cosine of 30, figure that out, and then remember what quadrant you're in and apply the appropriate sign. Okay, but you need to go ahead, do those three, and we'll move on. The first thing that we're doing today is actually something we already did. We're just going to add one more step to it. So we already did our Pythagorean identity a few sections ago, so we're going to do it again, and we're just going to add one thing to it. So your Pythagorean identity is sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. Hopefully this looks familiar because we have done it. So everything I'm going to do right now is something we've done. So it says find cosine if sine is 3/5 and we're in quadrant 2. So sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. So sine is 3/5 squared plus we don't know cosine squared, and it equals 1. So square 3/5. So 3/5 squared is 9/25 plus cosine squared equals 1. Subtract the 9/25 from both sides, and that gives you that cosine squared equals 16/25. We're not quite done because that's still cosine squared, so you have to take the square root of both sides. So cosine is 4/5. Okay. The only thing that we didn't do was what quadrant we're in. It says we're in quadrant 2, so cosine in the second quadrant is negative. So that's the answer. That's what we did a few sections ago. We're just going to add one more step. If we know sine and we know cosine, we can easily find tangent because tangent is sine over cosine. Okay, so tangent is sine over cosine. So all I have to do to find tangent is divide them. So my sine was 3/5 and my cosine was -4/5. And I'm just dividing those two fractions. If you don't have your calculator or whatever, you can do it by hand. You take your first fraction and multiply it by the reciprocal of your second fraction. So then that's going to be a -3/4. So tangent is -3/4. Okay, and that's all you have to do. So the first part we've already done. The only new thing is this tiny little division at the bottom. Okay, so just find one more step. We use the sine and the cosine to find tangent, which we just did. So you can move this down there if you want, but same thing we just did. Okay. All right. So now we're going to start from scratch. So it says sine is 1/2 and we're in quadrant 2. Find tangent. So they just kind of skip the whole find cosine first, but that's what you do. You need sine and cosine to be able to find tangent. So sine, which is 1/2 squared, plus cosine squared equals 1. 1/2 squared is 1/4 plus cosine squared equals 1. Subtract your 1/4 over 1 minus 1/4 is 3/4. And then we have to take the square root. 3 is not a perfect square, so we have to leave it in the square root. 4 is a perfect square, so we put it over 2 because the square root of 4 is 2. Okay? So cosine is radical 3/2. And we're in quadrant 2, so again, cosine is negative. Okay, so here's my cosine. I have given my sine. To find tangent, I just divide them out. So tangent is sine, which was 1/2, divided by cosine, which was negative the square root of 3/2. So take 1/2 and multiply it by -2 over radical 3. So that is -1/√3. You have to rationalize your denominator. So multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 3. So tangent is negative radical 3 over 3. And since we found the correct sine and cosine, we didn't have to worry about this, like whether it was positive or negative. That automatically happened. But we are in the second quadrant and tangent's negative in the second, so we know we're good there. Okay? The only other thing we're going to do is look at the graph of tangent. We are not going to do nearly as much with the graph of tangent as we did with the other graphs. But when you filled out your snowman lab, you should have seen that tangent is undefined, okay, where cosine is 0, which would be 90 and 270, because you can't divide by 0. So 90 and 270 are pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2. So if a graph is undefined, you have to have an asymptote. So I know you did that a lot in Algebra 2. You have those little dotted lines where the graph can't touch, and that's what kind of dictates what your tangent function looks like, okay? So if it's not defined in a certain place, you end up with asymptotes, so the lines that get closer and closer but will never touch. So when we draw our graph of tangent, we have to draw the asymptotes in there. So this is tangent from negative 3 pi over 2 up to 2 pi. Let's just look at this normal thing that we usually look at, which is from 0 to 2 pi. Notice that there is an asymptote at pi over 2, right here, this dotted line, and another one at 3 pi over 2, because that's where tangent is undefined. After that, you focus on the x-intercepts, which are going to be at 0, pi, and 2 pi, and it always goes up to the right and down to the left. So we put our asymptotes in first, then we're going to put in our x-intercepts, and then you just go up to the right and down to the left. We are not going to shift or stretch or do anything like that with tangent. We're just going to look at the very basic tangent function. Okay, has no amplitude because it goes up and down forever. Its period is pi, which is weird. Instead of 2 pi, it starts to repeat after pi, and it crosses the axis every pi. Okay, so this says to graph sine and tangent and figure out where they intersect. So I already labeled my x-axis. We should be very good at graphing sine by now. Ooh. Okay. Sine crosses at, or starts at 0, crosses at pi, ends at pi over 2, tops out in the middle, bottoms out in the middle here, and then we just connect them. That's regular sine. Okay. Tangent is a little trickier. We have to start with our asymptotes. Okay. So tangent is undefined at pi over 2. So you have a dotted line here, and 3 pi over 2, so you have another dotted line here. I think Notability does dotted lines for you now, so yours could be prettier than that. Then we're going to say tangent crosses at 0, pi, and 2 pi, so the exact same places. But then it just goes up to the right until it gets to the asymptote, and down to the left. So from those intersections, it just goes up to the right and down to the left. And then we're being asked to find how many times they cross. So all 3 here, 1, 2, 3, and then 4 and 5. So that's 5 intersections. Okay? We're not going to do a ton with that, but just be familiar with that tangent graph and what it looks like. Okay, you're doing 3-2. Bye, guys.